Hello and welcome to my video. This is a painting that I'm doing on a canvas. Now the canvas already had something on it. I've given it a bit of a scrape down and a very light sanding, and I've applied 3 coats of gesso. The painting size is in centimetres, 116 wide by 89 deep. Now, I know a lot of Americans are going to be watching this, so I'll give you that in inches. It's 45.5 inches wide by 35 inches deep. It's big. Not the biggest I've painted. The biggest I've actually worked on was 9 feet wide by 6 feet deep. And that was quite a few years ago. So here we are. It's got a few bumps in it. I'm not worried about the bumps, frankly, because they add accidental texture to the painting. And the more texture you can have in a painting, particularly of the style that I use. I mean, if I was painting something that was like, had to be a little bit stylized and smooth and simplified, possibly I wouldn't want to use a canvas like this. I'd use a board or a brand new canvas. So this one, though, it's got bumps, and I tend to think of it as having a little bit of character. So now I'm going to run through the list of what you need. Payne's grey, royal blue, phthalo blue, sap green, red ochre, and also obviously titanium white. And then I do add a little bit of light green using light green. Now, if you can't get red ochre, you can use burnt sienna. If you can't get sap green, get the nearest dark green you can. Add a bit of extra Payne's grey to it, just to darken it a little bit more. You can buy sap green in one shop and then buy it in another, and they'll be completely different. So the one I use is a product made by Le Franc Bourgeois, French company obviously, and it just happens to be the one that I like. Don't worry if you can't get that exact colour, just get the closest you can. Dark green, add a bit of Payne's grey. The red ochre, as I said, if you can't get it, use burnt sienna. Now, some people add cadmium red to sap green. That darkens the green down quite well. So you could take that route. For the white, which will be later, possibly at the end of the painting, if I do it in this sitting at all, I'm not sure yet. It's just the standard titanium white. The oil that I'm using already contains a cicative. So you can buy oil with a drying agent, which is what a cicative is, already added. Or you can buy the cicative and just add a few drops to the paint. Quite frankly, it doesn't matter which way you go. I just like it mostly already added because it means I can just get on with what I'm doing. This would also work if you added liquin. Now, it may end up quite expensive, particularly on a large painting like this, because the amount of oil that I use is well, I suppose it's almost a bit like a biblical flood sometimes. I use a lot of oil, so if you use the same amount of liquin, you might find it quite expensive. Okay, on a smaller painting. And I actually quite like liquin, by the way. It's quite a nice effect. And for some reason I like the smell, but anyway, I don't know why. You could now, okay, the other thing people ask me, could I get this effect in acrylics? Frankly, I don't know. I've tried it. I can paint with acrylics, but I'm not in this style. It just doesn't come out the same. I like oil paint. It's very forgiving. It's very mobile for a long time, and you don't build up too many big lumps of dry paint too quickly. I remember a few years ago I was teaching down in the south of France funnily enough, at a cooking school, but they also taught painting as a sideline. So they hired me to go down there and teach people to paint. And most people wanted to paint in acrylics. And because France in the summer, well, it gets hot. And they wanted to paint outside, which I really didn't like. I'd rather be under a certain amount of shade, but there you go. It got to the point where we were almost chucking buckets of water over the paintings just to stop them drying off. So yeah, if you want to try it in acrylics, please have a go. And I struggled. Maybe you won't struggle. I just didn't like the effect anyway. The brushes I use, they're all cheap. They're all from a hardware store. There is no maker written on the handle of the brushes that I use. I don't know where they come from. There's just a stamp on them that says that they're recycled wood. They cost almost nothing. Some people wouldn't dream of painting with cheap brushes. Oh my goodness. I mean, but it's just a brush. It's not the brush that does the painting. It's the person holding it. So I use a lot of oil, and I get the paint to the consistency of almost like, well, I suppose it's a bit like maple syrup. That's the closest I can get to it, except it's not quite so drippy. So if you imagine getting oil and paint together, really sloppy, so that when you lift your brush up, the paint is just starting to very gently and slowly drip off. If it's running off, forget it, because you'll paint a picture. It'll look good for a few minutes, and then eventually all the paint will just drop on the canvas, and it'll all drop, and you'll just end up with a grey mess, so a brown mess or grey mess, depending on your colours. It won't work. So it's got to have enough structure in the paint to hold on to the surface. If you do find you've started and it's looking good, and your painting is upright and you start to see lots of drips appear, lay it down flat quickly and leave it, and it'll stabilise. Just leave it for a few days, it'll set, and then you can carry on with your painting. So then, actually onto the painting itself now. As you can see, everything's very dark. Now, I'm not actually in a dark room, there's plenty of light. It's just that the painting is very dark, and the light will start to come out when I start wiping with the paper towels a bit. I like to start a picture as dark as possible. The reason I do this is because if you paint a picture that's too light and you want to work on it in one go, the worst thing that you can do is try to make light paint dark by adding dark over the top. It'll just mix together and you'll end up with a mid-tone. So start dark, head for the light. So here I'll just run through the colours. The mountains and the sky are phthalo blue. The pale blue below the mountain, well, the dark, very dark bit of the mountain has got some sap green in it. And then the pale bit below that is just where I've wiped the green and the blue together and just sort of wiped back to the colour of the canvas underneath. So I'm sort of sculpting shapes, and I'm trying to just show what I deem to be the important shapes within the picture. This is similar to the effect that you get when you look at a scene. If you want to see a scene in front of you, or even a photograph, in its simplest form, then half close your eyes and squint and look at the picture. The lights will show and the darks will show, and it simplifies everything so that you can start to work on your composition and where the general masses of interest are. Now, a little spoiler here. I've been plastering this all over Facebook, telling people that the video is coming, and last night I put up a message saying that there is a bit of a shock at the end. There will be a shock at the end, and I just know some of you are now skipping forward to go and look at the end to see what it is. If you can resist it, well, try, but if you can't, doesn't matter. Just come back here and start again so that you get the full effect of what's going to happen. It's a way of demonstrating how it's possible to change your mind in a picture and not get too fussed. So detach yourself from the picture. Just let it be whatever it's going to be. And if there's something that you want to lose, or if you change your mind, you can do it. You can just take another course. And at the end, that's what I do. So, if you're still here, thank you. And I'll start to talk about what I'm actually doing. As you can see, still the picture's very dark. I'm just plotting away in my mind, making shapes and textures, just to see what works and what doesn't work. I'm aware at the moment that a lot of my paintings seem to be, well, some of them look like you're possibly on a mountain looking down into a valley and a range of mountains in the distance. I wanted to get away from that a little bit because I don't want my stuff to become too samey. I know it is quite samey. I mean, it's always a landscape and it's always sort of reasonably dramatic, but I don't want to paint the same view every time. So this is probably the last one that I'll do of this subject. I'll start to spread out a little bit and maybe even take a few suggestions from people. I know that people want me to paint water, so I will be doing that. And I know that I've got a beach scene that I painted with some cliffs, and I'm going to finish that, just not at the moment. It's all down to workflow and how much teaching I've got. Or at the moment, not got. I mean, I'm teaching by making these videos, but so far it looks as though the year's pretty wiped out with people coming here. So I have to just sort of reset and wait for next year. I do have a retreat in August. I don't know how that's going to go because of the lockdown situation. It may be that that's going to make it just too difficult for people. I don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see, but I'll keep you posted. Now I could, on this painting, I could have left it with this sort of tone, really dark, and I could have said, well, this is an evening painting, either evening or very early morning, doesn't matter. It's dark, whichever way you look at it. But I do lighten it up. That'll be happening reasonably soon. Thank you, by the way, for all the nice comments I seem to be getting. The trolls seem to be backing off a bit because I think, I don't know, well, they won't be coming back. Not the trolls that I've had, anyway, because they will never see my channel again. Any new trolls coming along, if you've got nothing better to do, fine, leave a comment. Doesn't matter, I'll delete you. And I just wonder why people bother. So here, this little thing I'm doing with this flicking motion, just that little bit of light there. There's a sort of rule, particularly in, well, it's not just tonalism, but it seems to be more prevalent in tonalism, that you put a light next to a dark. Now that's pretty standard for most paintings, but in tonalism you tend to exaggerate that a little bit, just and it does have a nice effect, sort of instant twinkle in your painting. The brushes I'm using, as usual, are cheap brushes. This one I've got in my hand now is it's probably about a 3-inch wide brush. I've got another one that I'll be using, which is about 5 inches wide, but that's mostly for the sky. So, now we're coming to the part of the picture where it is lighter. It gets quite light. I've sort of forced the camera to pick up some of the light just so that you can see it a bit clearer. So what I was just saying a minute ago, put some light down, put some dark on top, so that you have that little effect of light, dark, etc. and moving the brush sideways through the paint, that pushes the paint away so that the colour of the gesso underneath, which is white of course, shows through. This is unusual for me, by the way, painting on this canvas. It was a painting that I've had knocking around for quite some time, and I've looked at it, and I've had it on my Facebook page. Nobody's been interested in buying it, so I decided that I'd paint over it. And I felt also, because it was quite an old one, it wasn't really in my new style. It was just a little bit too, I don't know, well, chintzy, I suppose. A little bit twee, and it just wasn't strong enough. So I decided that it was time to go. And as you probably know, I don't really like working on canvas anymore. I just didn't want to waste this one, so I thought I'll use it for a lesson. The problem, of course, with canvas is that when you put paint on it and try to wipe back, it's harder because the paint settles into the tooth of the canvas. Now, this canvas has got, well, it came with gesso on it, then I added 2 coats, then I painted a picture. So there's not a lot of texture coming through it. There is a bit, but not too much. So it does make it slightly easier. I think I will probably not paint on canvas again after this painting. I'm going to stick to plywood. I like the smoothness, and I like the fact that they're my textures and not the surface textures. I like to be in control. Not that I'm a control freak or anything like that, but I think you know what I mean. So the sky, this is royal blue with phthalo blue above it, and as you can see, I'm holding the brush so that I work down to roughly to the edge. I'm not going quite up to the edge, and I have more control of the brush because I can see the tip of the brush. If I was holding the brush pointing upwards, in other words with my hand below the horizon, I wouldn't be able to be that precise because I wouldn't be able to see the part of the brush that's making the mark. Now, the reason I'm doing this and not going all the way down is because, as I said a minute ago, I like to have control of the brush. So when I connect the mountains to the sky, I'll work from the mountains upwards so that I can then redefine the shape of the ridge line of the mountains. For those of you who may be interested, this again is one of my imaginative pictures. It's not based on anywhere. Some people have said, oh, it reminds me of Ireland. I've been to Ireland. I went once, way back in the 90s, I think it was. Must have been. Mid-90s, probably. And I stayed there for a few weeks. It didn't stop raining. It rained. I've never seen so much rain, frankly. And I'm sure that when I left, I travelled from England over to Ireland by coach, and I'm positive that as the coach left Ireland and got onto the ferry to come back into England, I swear the clouds parted, as if to say, okay, he's gone now, let's let the sun out. But it was incredible. The amount of rain was just phenomenal. So that's me just flicking off a little lump of paint that was underneath from the original painting. Quick flick with a palette knife, and off it goes, and it landed somewhere in my room. One thing I don't do in my videos, I did early on when I first started. I did a few videos that were speeded up or sped up. I don't think people like them. They just you won't learn anything from it. You just see someone producing a picture very fast, and I don't see the point. So this is all in real time. The only bits that I've cut out is when I've tried in this one as much as possible, when my shoulder gets in the way or my head. So there's very little cutting out on this. It's just the odd snip where I just forgot that I was videoing. This is Payne's grey now, straight from the tube, absolutely nothing added, because it's going to mix with the blue that's already on there. So very, very loosely indicating some dark clouds. Sorry about the wobbling. It's the canvas is just about okay for my easel, but possibly I should have put two easels together and then strapped it down a bit more, but it settles down in a minute. A word on state of mind when I'm painting like this. It's almost like my mind goes blank. I'm not really, with the sky, I'm not planning anything, because I know what's going to happen. I've got my formula for producing skies, so I know it'll be okay. So I'm not thinking to myself, oh, I must have a big dark bit there. It just happens that way. It's just the way it goes. The paint that I'm putting on for the sky, it does have some linseed oil in it, not much. Certainly not as much as the landscape. This is I like the paint to be reasonably stiff on the sky, because it's I want the smoothness. I don't particularly want brush marks. I know you can see brush marks at the moment, but I'll be going over it with a big brush to lose those. Some brush marks look okay in skies, but I don't want it to be obviously a brush mark. That's how I clean my big brush. I'm just about getting ready to do a bit of blending there. As usual, I'll tell you, no turpentine. The only thing I use is linseed oil. I was just reading a message on Facebook. Someone was saying to me that they don't like to use linseed oil because they don't like the smell. I don't particularly have a problem with the smell of linseed oil. I'm sure there must be someone out there that does, unless of course the person is confusing it with the smell of turpentine. Can't quite figure out how you would, but that's the only thing I use. I don't use any solvents. I don't use solvents for cleaning brushes. I use detergent. Here's a thing that possibly will help it stick in your mind about why I use detergent. Some people, I think that detergent won't clean the brush well enough. Well, okay. So imagine you've got a frying pan. You've just had some fried food. What are you going to use to clean that frying pan? Are you going to use turpentine, or are you going to use detergent? I'll leave that with you. So I've added a little bit more Payne's grey to the blue here, just to get these, well, I hesitate to say detail, but these shapes that will hopefully give the illusion of detail. So there you see I'm pushing the mountain into the sky, so I don't have to carefully paint along a horizon with a small brush. And over distance, sometimes it's quite hard to see where the sky ends and the landscape begins. This is obviously paper that I've screwed into like a taper back and forth, just to get some light in. Again, there's still no real plan on this picture. It's quite similar to something. In fact, it's similar to the picture that's on my Facebook banner, which is a painting I did probably about a year ago. And it just happens to be a reasonable composition with a bit more weight to the right-hand side of the picture, which always seems to work quite well. Dabbing just to get a few highlights in. When this painting is finished, by the way, I will be glazing over the top. So this, what you see at the end of this video, apart from the surprise, which will happen, it's basically underpainting, because I'm going to add various glazes over the top to try and make the whole thing look much more rich. It comes out okay, but it's just a little bit, what's the word? I suppose understated. Hasn't got enough guts to it. Always remember when you're painting landscapes, don't make your greens and sort of land parts of the painting, don't make them too flat green, because landscape is absolutely full of texture. When we paint pictures, we tend to simplify a little bit, unless of course you're into high detail, extremely high resolution painting. That's a whole different thing. I'm not particularly interested in that style of painting, because I just don't see the point. But everyone to their own. I like the look that it's been painted. Hope that makes sense. But to me, it has more life in it than something that just replicates a photograph. I'm working on this composition there with that light part that I was just wiping there, sort of in the middle to the left. It's called a serpentine composition, where you lead the eye in and it meanders slightly. It goes into the right, over to where my hand is, and then back across to the right. Just as a little reminder, when you're painting, don't get too attached. If you do, your painting will become stiff. Keep as relaxed as possible, and also keep it in your mind that nothing matters in a painting. There are far more important things going on the planet at the moment. So if you're painting like this for relaxation, take away any stress that you may have about being perfect. Don't try to be perfect. Keep it relaxed and fluid. Eventually, you'll appreciate what I mean on that. Everyone, when they start painting, and I mean everybody, unless you're born knowing all this already, everyone starts to think, right, I've got to do this absolutely perfectly right. It's got to be right. I must paint it very carefully. It's going to be the best painting ever, and they get stiff and can't relax, and something will go wrong. So you get more stressed, and believe me, it will show in your painting. Keep everything loose and flexible all the way through, right to the end. Now you may find that that's not the style you want, but it does actually help if you do want more detail. Until you really get to understand paint and how it works, you must relax, you must be loose. Tightening up comes later. Very few people can start without any painting knowledge and just paint a highly detailed picture. You must go through the untidy stage before you get to the finished. I suppose I hate using the word, but the tight effect that you may want. Because I'm not trying to make you paint the way I paint. What I'm doing is trying to get you to relax and change your mindset so you actually don't really care too much. It's the same thing if someone throws a ball at you. I think a lot of people have experienced this. If you see the ball coming, you're really concentrated and you're going to catch that ball. Quite often you won't. There's always this thing where you'll see it out the corner of your eye coming, and your hand will instinctively know where to catch the ball. It's an unconscious thing, and it's I suppose what I'm trying to say is you need to get that frame of mind where you will instinctively know what to do with the brush, what to do with the palette knife. And that's incidentally what I'm using there to put on the white paint. It's finding the instinct. So several ways to use a palette knife. When I'm doing those clouds low on the horizon, I use it like a flat iron, back and forth, so that I make small, thin shapes. When I'm putting the paint on en masse up in the sky, I just use it like a builder's trowel, just shovel the paint on. And in a moment, you'll see the effect this has when I skim over it with a large brush. You know the saying, to make an omelette, you have to break eggs? Look at it that way. To get a painting to work, it has to start untidy, then bring it together gradually. While you're doing this palette knife effect on the sky, I'm not sure whether you'll be able to see on the video, but apart from putting the white on and reasonably carefully spreading it, because I don't want to make a hole in the canvas. If it was board, I'd be going at this more aggressively. But there are scratch marks from the palette knife in the paint as well. They don't matter. You see, that's obviously just smearing the paint there. But just above that, you may be able to see them. There are some scratches, one or two. It doesn't matter. They'll disappear when I go over it with the big brush. I've always found it interesting how the mountains, if you paint the mountains in blue the way I've done, I mean this is very blue, but again it's drama, you see, I like drama. I only like drama in my paintings, by the way. I don't like drama in my life. I do everything I can to avoid drama, but in my paintings, yep, shovel it on. Yes, the blue, it's called the Tinsdale effect. It's named after some scientist guy whose name, astonishingly enough, was Tinsdale, who realised that dust particles in the atmosphere reflect light. Further away they are from you, the more blue there is in the landscape. You can Google that, and it'll explain it better than I can at the moment. Big brush. When you can't see it, it's because I'm giving it a wipe. So anyway, you can see that I'm hardly touching the canvas because suddenly it's not flying around the room. Just skimming it carefully. And then more wiping. And as I said, no turpentine, just wiping it on paper towel. Everybody that came here, for those who don't know, by the way, I'm in France, but for everyone that came here for lessons last year, and I think it was about 33 different people, so it was a busy year last year. The main thing they wanted to paint were skies, and most of them, if not all of them, were astonished at how quickly you can produce an effective sky like this. It's quite a revelation. I'm sure that there are, well, I remember when I was a student, before we were really instructed, we were just let loose to do what we wanted. And it's amazing how many students sat there and drew clouds with pencil, actually little bobbly topped clouds, and then got brushes out to carefully paint the white cloud and then put some blue next to it. That didn't last long. I remember the first time I did it, the teacher came up behind me, whispered something in my ear so as not to embarrass me, which went along the lines of, "What the heck are you doing?" And then he picked up a rag and wiped off what I'd done and said, "Now paint on that." And it was like a light bulb going on. Suddenly I thought, interesting. I've got all this nice flat blue, and I don't have to blend it. The rag has done it for me. So a little a little bit of sculpting there. I decided that the mountain didn't have quite enough presence. So I just put a peak on the top. So all those streaks on the lower part of the mountain, it's just me wiping off bits of colour, just to give the appearance of distant fields or whatever the mind decides to actually see in those shapes. Could be anything. Could be water. Oh, for those of you who want me to paint water, they're water. Okay, that's got that out of the way. So a little bit more paint. Now, I'd already put paint there and then I'd softened it. So now I'm putting on stronger paint, absolutely no oil added whatsoever, and I'm skimming over the surface to keep it as white as I can. And then I will do the blending again, just to soften that. So I'm sort of working in layers. Think of everything as layers. That's a good way to approach it. It's the same with glazing. You know, when this is dry, I can add some red to those clouds, possibly. I don't know what I'll do yet, but it'll be a few weeks before this is dry enough to do anything anyway. But you still need the contrasts in your painting to allow the glazing to work on top. So if those clouds are all just dark, I would have trouble putting a sort of pale red on the clouds. Obviously, the pale red on a dark blue cloud is not going to make it lighter, it's going to make it darker. And never forget, on skies, perspective works on skies the same as it does on the land. Smaller clouds near the horizon, bigger clouds at the top. That'll give the appearance of the clouds coming over your head. So again, a few swipes, another wipe, and then back. If you don't wipe it, after about 3 or 4 swipes, you'll just be putting paint back on the picture. And you don't want to do that. If I'm trying to soften the white clouds, what I don't want to do is put blue on them. Just want to take away the brush marks. So now I'm starting to think about what I can do in the landscape. The sky is almost there. There isn't a lot to do to it. I'll probably have a little poke around on it later, but most of the sky is done. And you can see, you know, it didn't take long. It's really quite fast. I was wondering the other day while I was painting something, how much brush time do I use on a painting as opposed to how much paper towel time? And I think it's about 50-50, I suppose. The thing about the paper towel and textures like this, you notice I'm rolling the paper, by the way, because you don't want the same pattern to just repeat. It's one of the worst things you can do on a painting. Yeah, the paper towel, I like the fact that it throws up textures that you wouldn't normally expect. And there is a definite technique to doing this. When you wipe something, you have to wipe and stop and look. If you just wipe on one spot back and forth, you'll just end up sort of blurring everything and making everything flat and monotonous. So it's one wipe, step back, take a look. One wipe, step back. And you have to learn when to stop. If you don't, you'll just end up with mud, basically. So for those of you who want to see my palette, that's it. Well, that's one of them. I've got about 4 on the go. That's red ochre and sap green. And this is one of my smaller brushes now. This is a It's called a black hog. I get these from Jackson's of London, and they are just the right shape for this sort of distant tree. It's a filbert is the name of the shape. They are just perfect brushes. I can't recommend them more than that. They're fantastic brushes. This is the only time I use my expensive brushes, when I'm doing this sort of thing. Everything else is done with the cheap ones. And you can see what I'm doing there. I had the light on the picture, and I'm adding the dark so that the light sneaks through it, rather than have to put white, light green on the top. So I'm going on a bit of a tree fest here. The problem is with this, it's one of those control things. It's quite pleasurable to do this, and you once you get the hang of it, and you just manage a tree with 1 or 2 touches of paint, and then move on to the next one. You have to discipline yourself so that you don't overdo it. And before I go on, that is one of the things that made me change the painting right at the end. I felt that I had been too finicky, so I thought, well, let's shock everyone. Hope I don't lose too many subscribers. I did put a warning on Facebook saying, be prepared, some of you may feel dizzy-headed or something and need to sit down, or possibly, as we would say in England, have a cup of tea. You'll feel much better. I just decided a little bit more simplicity. Not sure if I went too far. I don't think so, because I have a plan for what I'm going to do, how I'm going to fix it. We'll see. I had a very interesting conversation with somebody once. I was a freelance artist in London for quite a few years, and I needed to borrow some money, so I went to my bank, and they were very helpful. I got the money that I needed, and I was chatting to the bank manager, and before he would give me the money, he communicated me. This is in the days way before email. This would have been a phone call. He said, I'm interested. He said that you're an artist. Could you bring in some samples of your work? Well, and then we'll talk about your bank loan. I thought, oh, that's great. Maybe he's going to buy a painting. But he didn't. But it was a very interesting conversation, because I took about 5 paintings and maybe 15 drawings and a few magazines that I designed, that sort of stuff. And we went through the financial stuff, and then he said, can I look at some of your pictures? And I said, yeah, absolutely, no problem. So I got these things out, and he said, just tell me something. He said, how do you do that? So I said, do what? He said, well, how do you paint a picture? Do you see it in your head? And I said, well, it depends on what you're doing. If it's something that someone's commissioned you to do, and they have a photograph for you to base your work on, then it's almost like copying. You just make a drawing from a photograph. If it's something that requires a bit of imagination, then that's where, having been to college, and I guess, I don't know about natural talent, I'm not sure about that. I tend to think more of hard work. So there was one painting I showed him, and he said, where's that? And I said, oh, it's in my head. And he said, what do you mean it's in your head? Do you see that in your head? And I said, yeah, I just imagine it, and there it is. And he said, I don't know whether it's because my life revolves around money and finance. He said, but I don't see pictures in my head. And I thought, that's a bit sad. I said, what, you mean even when you're going to sleep, you don't see images and stuff like that? And he said, no, nothing. Just I close my eyes, it's just darkness. He said, and I don't ever remember dreaming, and I just don't see images. He says, I can't recall images. He said, when I go somewhere and I go on holiday, I have to take lots of photographs because I just don't remember it. I don't remember the feel of the place. So I thought, well, that's pretty depressing. And anyway, it was a shock to me because I was born with this weird, quirky memory thing. Apart from remembering pretty well every scene I've ever looked at, I remember every photograph I've ever seen, every photograph I've put in a magazine. And I've worked on one magazine for 14 years, and that was a weekly magazine. And I was the art director on a magazine called Geographical for a few years, and I can remember every picture I ever looked at. But the weird thing about this strange memory is that every night when I go to bed, I have to go through a slideshow. It's like I'm seeing everything that I've looked at during the day, sometimes even the day before, and it can be just the corner of a room, or it could be something that's lying on my desk, or even a floorboard that has a nice, interesting shape in it, something like that. I go through around about 20 or 30 of these images every night, and I can't stop it. I can't say to myself, oh, let's stop this and just go to sleep. I have to actually go through and see the whole lot. Now, I've never met anyone else who has this, or maybe people don't talk about it, but it's extremely useful for me to have this, because wherever I go, I just have to look. Once I've looked for a few minutes, it's there, it's stored in my head. And the even stranger thing is that the magazine I worked on in England called Country Life magazine, I have a few old copies of that lying around. This is going back over 30 years now, pretty well, I guess, yeah. I can look at the magazines I've got and just choose a page and look at a picture, and I know what I was doing that day. I can remember the day. I can remember the things that happened. But this'll bend your brain. What I can't remember is, what did I have for lunch yesterday? Strange. But as I said, it's a very useful thing if you're a painter. It's good to have an eidetic memory, which is what it's called, apparently. This is light green I'm putting on here now, straight from the tube. The only real mixing on this painting, I guess, has been done in the sky a little bit, and just below these light green bits that I'm putting in, where we've got the green and the blue mixing. Everything else is pretty well from the tube. Apart from the dark green does contain red ochre, but that's pretty standard on most of my, well, at the moment, all of my paintings, I think. If you go to my Facebook page and you want to see other stuff that I've done, I have painted portraits. If you go, as I said, if you go on my Facebook page, go to my art page. I'll put a link in the box below, and just have a rummage through the pictures, and you'll find some portraits that I've painted. Oh, which brings me to another thing I must mention. Someone asked me about portraits. There's portraits, there's some pen and ink drawings, there's what else have we got? Yeah, there's a pencil drawing or two, that sort of stuff. A few cartoons as well, I think. Somebody asked me, could this technique be used for painting portraits? And my answer to the person was yes, it can, but then they wanted to know more. What I mean by that is it's the approach. You wouldn't necessarily use these colours. Dark brown would probably be a better colour for a portrait. But you could put a bit of green in it, because flesh tones do contain a certain amount of green. But it's the loose approach, very, very fluid, you know. Don't be, even if you watch some of the best portrait painters around today, and one that I absolutely love his work, is a guy called Vladimir Volgov. He is just an absolute maestro. His portraits, and they tend to be either very young, pretty women or children, or I don't think I've seen many. In fact, have I seen any? I don't recall seeing a painting of a man by him. It always tends to be women. But this guy, he approaches his portraits in the most fluid way. And if you go and look at his stuff, you will learn a lot more about portraits from him than you will from me. I don't particularly want to paint a portrait ever again. I've done my share of that. I suppose, around 250 to 300 paintings, nearer to 300, I suppose. But portraits, I find a lot of trouble. Nobody's ever happy with their nose. It's always too long, too short, or too wide. So I thought, oh, let's take away the anguish and just paint trees. Trees don't complain. And also, if I was painting a portrait, it would be a commission. And I just don't do commissions anymore. I've had my life painting commissions. I don't want to do it again. I'm more than happy to paint what I want to paint. But also, obviously, if you're watching this, landscapes, because I can just conjure up a landscape, and you can too. I'm sure there are people watching this who think, I could never do that. Well, actually, you could do it. What you need is, several things. Someone standing next to you, nitpicking everything you do, in a nice way, of course. I don't mean giving you a hard time, but if you want to paint like this, it's really good to have someone actually stand next to you. Now, I'm not doing this to drum up business, because frankly, I don't have to. I know that when this lockdown situation has gone away, the students will come back. There's a big waiting list, so I'm not worried about that. But if you can stand there next to someone doing this, you will learn how to do this. And like I said earlier, I don't want you to paint like me, well, unless you want to, of course. I'm not teaching people to paint like me. I'm teaching people to have the same approach to painting. Your own style will come out on its own. That colour that I'm adding there in the foreground there, that's yellow ochre, by the way. Again, straight from the tube. Because it will mix with whatever's on the painting. I hope I can get to the end of this because my voice is starting to fade. But I'll be strong. Okay, so the odd random scratch in the paint. It's the quick way of producing marks on fields. Here's an interesting thing to do if you're really into landscape. Next time you're out in the countryside, look at fields. Now you may think, oh, there's fields, they're just green. They're not. I don't recommend doing this while you're driving. Get someone else to drive. You be the passenger. To get them to drive you around the countryside and just look at the different textures of fields. You can have one field next to another like this. You can have one that's reasonably flat green. And right next to it, you'll have one that's got a blue tinge, or it's got a red tinge, or it's got scrape marks in it, or tractor marks, or plough marks, that sort of stuff. When you put marks on a field, see the way I'm doing this here? As loose as possible. And I'm actually scraping in the paint as well in a few places there. Quite an effective, quick way to do stuff. Always remember, this is something to keep in your head. You are creating in paint. You're not reproducing a field or a tree. You're creating in Payne. So let the paint have its own voice. So it won't be long now before I do the shocking thing that, as I said, may make you want to sit down and have a nice cup of tea. It's a little way to go yet. It's coming though. I quite liked the painting. I don't mean to sound as though I'm making excuses for what happens later, but it was okay. But I looked at it and then I stopped. This is painted over 2 days, by the way. There's a break roughly halfway through the video. I looked at it and I photographed it, and then I looked at it again, and I sat at my desk working, and again I would sort of not look at it for an hour and then suddenly look at it quickly. That's another little useful trick, by the way. Just apart from stopping every now and then so that you see your painting with fresh eyes, is to ignore it for an hour and then suddenly look at it and see what it is that hits you that you don't like or you do like. What I was saying earlier, by the way, about going for a drive in the countryside and looking at all the different textures you get, if you're not able to do that, there's this amazing thing. Google Earth. Just choose a bit of somewhere. I mean, you may be in England, you may be in America. Go to Google Earth or Google Maps and go down to ground level and just have a look, see what there is. I've done that here in France. Usually when I want to find where I'm going to go somewhere, I have no sense of direction, so I have to do this. And you can drive along the road that you'll be driving along later, just have a quick look. And if you look around, you may find something that's paintable. And you'll also see what I'm talking about with all the textures in the land too. Particularly good if it's raining. If you live in Ireland, of course. So there. Now, as I'm doing these shapes here, I'm still not really thinking of trying to make it look like a field. I'm just pushing the stuff around and making shapes in it just to make it more interesting than if it was just a block of green. So there's just the top of the tree needed a bit of reshaping. This video has, I think it runs to just over an hour. I would think allowing for the cutting out bits, the occasional pause where I've just gone off to have a little think about it or done something else. I suppose the total time from start to finish is about 2 hours. Certainly no more than that. So we're going to come to the end very soon. I hope you'll come back to see what happens on the next video, which will be in a few weeks, because obviously it has to dry a bit before I can do any more on it. And I hope you've enjoyed it up to this point. I'd be interested to know what you think of the end result. Brace yourselves. Right, before we get to that though, in a second, you're going to see this up to this point. Decent photograph. Okay, so it looks like that. Now then, you'll get to look at that for a few seconds. While you're doing that, I'll just say one thing. If you've liked my video, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, and you'll know when I next upload a video. And I will see you on the next video, and I will see you Oh dear, what's this? This is the dreaded ball of kitchen paper. And here we go. That's what I did to it. I wiped it. What I want to do is simplify the foreground. But you'll notice, by taking all that away in the foreground, it's brought us down to ground level. And next time, you'll see what I do to this. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. See you on the next video. Stay safe. Bye for now.